Hi, I'm Danny with Tax 29 Tax Service.
And I'm Andy. You know, Danny, the prices of everything keeps going up and up.
Inflation.
Well, at Tax 29, we said enough. We're keeping our pricing structure the same this year as what we had last tax season.
So whether you file in one of our local offices or whether you file with us online at tax29.com, you'll get the same professional tax prep at affordable pricing along with year-round service.
For a list of our pricing or to find out more, stop by one of our local offices or visit us at tax29.com.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.
Welcome to Discovering His Story, a program produced by yctv.org. In this program, we seek to integrate the biblical record with the secular historical record and see where people and events intermesh with one another, gaining a better understanding of the Bible and of history as well. The last time that we were together, in discovering his story, we ended with the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC. The timeline of the remnants of the Greek Empire will continue following that event, especially as it relates to Israel. But first, we must take a backwards leap to catch up with what was happening on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea in Rome. For what occurs in the history of Rome will also have a great impact, not only in the history of Israel during the time of the Greek generals, but also on New Testament times. So we're taking a giant step back from the 4th century BC to the 9th century BC as we continue in our study of ancient times, now focusing on the Roman Republic. Have you ever heard the expression, all roads lead to Rome? David A. Fisher, in his textbook, World History for Christian Schools, writes, "Today, if you were to travel in Spain, France, Britain, Italy, Greece, Asia Minor, Palestine, Egypt, or North Africa, you could find roads built about 2,000 years ago by the Romans. In fact, some of the modern roads in these lands are built on top of the firm, deep base of the old Roman roads. The Romans constructed a network of roads that connected the far corners of their vast empire with their capital city. It could literally be said of the ancient world that all roads lead to Rome." The first of the great paved Roman roads was called the Via Appia, named after the censor, and we'll talk about what a censor is later. He's a government official. His name was Appius Claudius. And the reason the road was named after him is because he developed a new basis for judging a person's tax liability, which then contributed to the building of roads. That new basis for paying taxes was ownership of property. Do I hear a cheer for property taxes? His system opened up fresh sources of revenue for the state. Rome used much of this money in the construction of roads, such as we see here. In 312 BC, the Romans constructed the first aqueduct leading into Rome. And here's the map of the roads of Rome. You can see that it crossed throughout much of the Roman Empire. And primarily the roads were built for the military because they wanted to be able to get their soldiers to any part of the empire that they needed to as quickly as possible. But of course, what was built for the military became useful for merchants and for travelers. Well, in addition to roads, they also built water ducts. This is the first aqueduct leading into Rome, called the Aqua Appia, again named after Appius Claudius. Here's another picture of an aqueduct, still standing after thousands of years, which was designed to bring fresh water from the mountains down into first the city of Rome and then other cities as Rome conquered the known world. Here's another aqueduct still standing. Remarkable feat of engineering and architecture. Well, Rome was the culmination of the ancient civilizations. Remember Nebuchadnezzar's statue, which started with Babylon, and then to Media Persia, to Greece, and then Rome is the last empire predicted in this statue. But Rome, like the others, ends up being an empire of spiritual darkness. Fisher continues, in a figurative sense, the road of ancient history also leads us to Rome. Rome was the culmination of ancient civilization. The world had never seen an empire of such power and influence. The story of the tremendous growth and achievement of the Romans, who were descendants of Japheth, could be a fulfillment of Genesis 9:27. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. Though successful in a worldly sense, Rome sank to the depths of spiritual darkness. She readily embraced the pagan gods and false teachings of her many conquered peoples. But as we know, the advent of Jesus Christ and the establishment of the Church of Jesus Christ and Christianity would change everything. But that's in the future yet for us. But the Roman world does become the cradle of Christianity. As Fisher says, the road of God's plan for the ages leads us to Rome as well. God chose to send his Son, Jesus Christ, into the world when the Roman civilization was at its height. God had been at work in the history of the ancient world, preparing the world for the coming of the Savior. The Roman world was the cradle of Christianity. From the Roman province of Judea, the truth of the gospel spread to every part of the globe, yes, using those Roman roads. Continued influence of Rome, the city, we find as, once again, Fisher tells us, that the roads built by the Romans have endured to the present, and so also has the influence of Rome. And in this program and in the ones to follow, we're going to examine Rome, first of all, as a city, then as a republic. Following that, after we take a break to look at the intertestamental period, we'll see Rome as an empire, as a culture, and then finally we'll see Rome as a church, or the church of the Roman Empire. In each of these aspects, Fisher says, Rome left a lasting imprint on the world. Rome, the city, has remained a prominent metropolitan center to the present day. Rome, the republic, developed many principles of law and government that are practiced by many modern governments. In fact, many of our founding fathers would look back at the Roman Republic as one of the foundation stones, the sets of principles that were used in establishing our own republic. Rome, the empire, contributed to the idea of a one-world government. Rome, the culture, laid the foundation for our Western heritage by conveying the contributions of the ancient world to modern times. And finally, Rome, the church, after the introduction of Christianity, gradually developed into a religious system that we call Roman Catholicism that has perverted the truth of Christianity. Well, let's go back and look at the beginning of Roman civilization. First, we need to notice some of the geographic features of Italy where this civilization began. As you probably know, the soil and climate of Italy are suitable for farming. They produce a lot of different crops as they have such a warm weather. You know, in fact, we have a whole system of eating based upon what is grown there, the Mediterranean diet, as Italy is in the Mediterranean Sea as well as some other lands around. If you look in the center, if you can see it very well there, there's a mountain range that runs right down the center, kind of the backbone of Italy. Those are called the Apennine Mountains. Another feature, of course, of Rome or of Italy is the fact that it juts out into the Mediterranean Sea. The word Mediterranean is in fact Latin. Medi meaning middle, terra coming from meaning the word land, and so literally Mediterranean Sea is sea in the middle of the land. Later called by the Romans Mare Nostrum, our sea, because they had control of it. Well, the early inhabitants of Italy included a number of different tribes. We'll mention a couple of them. First of all, we find the Latins there. You can find that in the sort of a darker green than the green around it. It was from these people that the language of Rome would come. That language has impacted our present-day English language as well. That's why it's instructive for students to take Latin in order to understand English as well as many other languages, many of the other European languages. I thought I would remind you of some of the Latin phrases and words with which we're familiar. For example, we've all heard carpe diem, seize the day. And who could forget ad nauseum when somebody talks on and on? It means endlessly. And the famous et cetera, meaning and so forth. Oh, and then our word memento, which means a keepsake, is a Latin word. We talk about things being de facto, something which is in reality. That's a Latin phrase. Vero means really. Cum laude, with distinction. Let's see, what else? Per se, in and of itself. And then here's one that I think needs to come back into usage again. Abeo. Abeo means I'm out of here. All right, those are a few Latin words and phrases. I'm sure you could probably come up with more as you think about it. But this comes from a tribal group that are living in Italy. Another group that lived in the area were the Phoenicians, who established colonies on Sicily, which you see at the bottom off of the boot. It says Sicilians there, but those were Phoenicians. Now, do you remember the Phoenicians? The Phoenicians settled the cities of Tyre and Sidon along the eastern coast of what we call Palestine or the Levant. They were the great seafarers, and they came across the Mediterranean Sea to the western part of the Mediterranean and established colonies in different places, and some of them were on the island of Sicily. So Phoenicians were living there. We had Greeks coming into Italy. They settled in southern Italy, and they referred to their land as Vitalia, which meant land of cattle, and that led to the land being called Italy, Vitalia, Italia. So the name Italy comes from the fact that the Greeks saw it as a great place to raise cattle. And then one of the more important groups that settled were the Etruscans. You can see them in the sort of yellowish, in the towards the upper part of Italy, further north. They established one of Italy's earliest civilizations along the western coast. They were a seafaring power, originally from Africa, although most Greek and Roman historians indicate that their origin was Lydia in Asia Minor. Their merchant ships traded in every major port of the Mediterranean. According to one historian, they were a short, swarthy, meaning black race, who initially populated France and Germany. They were a formidable foe on land, and their secret weapon, wait for it, their secret weapon enabled them to win many battles was sturdy leather shoes. Have you ever tried to fight a battle in your bare feet or on sandals that came apart? Well, the Etruscans found the solution. But through most of the 6th century BC, these allied municipalities constituted the strongest political force in Italy, with a well-organized army, a famous cavalry, and a powerful navy that for a time ruled what is still called the Tyrrhene or Etruscan Sea. In fact, the Greeks called them Tyrrhenians because the water west of the Italian peninsula was the Tyrrhenian Sea. Now, interesting thing about the Etruscans is how they wrote. We've looked at different kinds of writing in the past. We've seen the Egyptians that could either go left to right, right to left, or up and down. We've seen Hebrew, which goes right to left. We've seen other languages that go left to right. The Etruscans, however, were a kind of people that apparently didn't like to pick up their pen at the end of a sentence. And so they wrote as the ox plows. So they would go one direction, and when they got to the end, they didn't pick up and go back again. No, they kept going back the other direction. And then there's that direction, and then that direction. So they went back and forth that way. The religion of the Etruscans included the worship of 12 great gods, some of whom kept hordes of winged demons, included the sacrifice of sheep, bulls, and men. Human victims were slaughtered or buried alive at the funerals of the great. The Etruscans appeared to have believed that for every enemy that they killed, he could secure the release of a soul from hell. Sort of sounds like a kind of indulgence. For a century, the Roman nation was ruled and formed by Etruscan civilization and power. Now let's move forward to the founding of Rome itself. On the banks of the Tiber River, 7 Latin villages made up of the tribes of the Latins, Sabines, and Etruscans formed the League of the 7 Hills. This is the beginning of the city of Rome. Now there's a legend attached to the beginning of Rome, and that has to do with Romulus and Remus. These were the twin grandsons of a king, the brother of which attempted to drown the twins in the Tiber River by setting them adrift in a basket. Fortunately, they were discovered by a she-wolf who suckled them, saving their lives. They later were found and raised by a shepherd named Faustulus. When they grew up, Romulus and Remus decided to establish a city. However, a disagreement arose over where to build it. Romulus wanted to start the city on the Palatine Hill. You can see it there towards the center. Remus preferred the Aventine Hill next to it. This dispute led to a fight in which Romulus killed Remus. Romulus then founded the city of Rome, named after himself, in 753 BC. Let's take a look at early Roman society and government. Roman society had the basic unit of the family as its foundation. The family was all important. And that goes to the leadership of the father, or pater. He is the sole authority. Listen to what famous historian Will Durant had to say about this tradition. He says, "He alone of the family had any rights before the law in the early republic. He alone could buy, hold, or sell property, or make contracts. Even his wife's dowry in this period belonged to him. If his wife was accused of a crime, she was committed to him for judgment and punishment. He could condemn her to death for infidelity or for stealing the keys to his wine. Over his children he had the power of life, death, and sale into slavery. All that the son acquired became legally his father's property. Nor could he marry, that is the son, without his father's consent. A married daughter remained under her father's power unless he allowed her to marry cum manu, gave her into the hand or power of her husband. Over his slaves he had unlimited authority. These and his wife and children were mancipia to him, literally taken in hand. And no matter what their age or status, they remained in his power until he chose to emancipate them or let them out of him, emancipate. These rights of the paterfamilias were checked to some degree by custom, public opinion, the clan council, and Praetorian law. Otherwise, they lasted to his death and could not be ended by his insanity or even by his own choice. Their effect was to cement the unity of the family as the basis of Roman morals and government, and to establish a discipline that hardened the Roman character into stoic strength. They were harsher in the letter than in practice. The most extreme of them were seldom used. The rest seldom abused. So says Will Durant. And so strong families were one of the foundations of Rome's greatness. Now, families were considered to be those that came from a common ancestor, which an extended family formed a clan. So your relatives would be, your close relatives would be a clan. And then a number of clans would form a tribe. So that's where we have the idea of a clan and a tribe. There were two social classes among these early Romans. One was the patricians. These were the wealthy aristocrats. And the other were the plebeians. The plebeians were the common people. They were farmers, peasants, even freed slaves. The plebeians could not hold public office, and they were not allowed to vote on laws. By 200 BC, however, they had come to have most of the same rights as the patricians. And we'll see some of that process as we go along. If you're looking at it in a diagram, you can see that the social classes come out this way. The patricians were the few. They're at the very top. The plebeians were next. They would include the people aforementioned, form kind of a middle ground between the very wealthy and then the slaves and the freedmen. Those who have been freed from slavery would be the majority, and they would be at the bottom. Well, the government of this early Rome was a monarchy. So there was one person ruling. The authority was called the imperium, and you can see, well, we get some words from that like emperor and empire, imperial. The symbol of the imperium was a bundle of rods enclosing an axe called the fasces. See the rods there and an axe sticking out of it. If it looks familiar, you may have seen it on an old dime. So that early monarchy eventually gave way to the Republic. The establishment of the Republic, then, we find coming about in this way. The Etruscans conquered the Latin villages and established a monarchy. But the Latin city of Rome continued to increase. In 509 BC, the king was overthrown and a republic was established with an administration divided among the consuls, the Senate, and the assemblies. Now, this is what might look to be a complicated slide of the early Roman Republic. The arrows show the flow, but essentially the Senate was the main body of authority in the Republic. It was, as it says, an aristocratic body. About 300 members held most of the power. From there, power flowed to our left to the two censors. They were chosen from the Senate membership. They served for 18 months. They were the ones that drew up official lists determining taxation, military service, and voting eligibility. To the right, power flowed to the two consuls, also chosen from the Senate. They served for 1 year. They're the ones that held the imperium, carried out the laws, and commanded the army. On the left, the two censors, power flows from them eventually to the tribal assembly, which was a popular assembly chosen from the districts called tribus, and they elected some government officials. From the tribal assembly, then we have the 10 tribunes, and we'll talk about them in a moment. Also from the two censors, we have power flowing over to the assembly of centuries. This was another popular assembly. These members were organized by social class, and they voted by group, each group having one vote. So no matter how many people were there representing a particular social division of society, that group only got one vote. And they elected some government officials as well. And then both the tribal assembly and assembly of centuries feed into the 10 tribunes. They were elected by the assemblies, served for 1 year, and their main feature was that they could veto decisions of the Senate or the consuls. So even though the Senate has I shouldn't say all power, most of the power, there's some power that comes from down below, especially in the end result of being a veto. Well, let's look in a little more detail about these things. The Roman Republic is established with administration divided among the consuls, the Senate, and the assemblies. So we had two consuls elected by citizens, each ruled for 1 year. They supervised the daily affairs of government. That's an executive branch. They commanded the Roman army, another executive branch, and they served as supreme judges of the land, which was a judicial feature. So all three elements of government are represented here. Then the Senate was the most important and most powerful body. They were the legislative branch. The assembly of centuries were the common people. They were also legislative. They voted on legislation, made declarations of war, elected high-ranking government officials, but the Senate had veto power over them. Now, what's going to happen is that these different parts of the Republic are going to ebb and flow as to how much power they would have. And so as power goes back and forth, there are going to be some different struggles within the government of this early Roman Republic, which is going to have to wait until our next time as we look at the struggle within the Republic and the progression that happens next time on Discovering His Story.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the earth and our universe is really his story.